Boys' hostels have a way of never really sleeping. Even when the lights are out, something is always alive. The faint tapping of keys as someone types in the dark, muffled laughter from the next room, the metallic groan of water pipes echoing through the corridors, or the sudden thud of a door slamming somewhere far away. But room 26 was unusually quiet that night. So quiet it was the middle of exam season, when the hostel usually felt like a strange battlefield, half the boys running on caffeine in panic, the other half pretending not to care. Inside room 26, 3 of the 4 roommates were already half asleep. Phones dimly lit their tired faces, shadows stretched against the cracked walls. And the air smelled of stale, instant noodles and damp laundry. The 4th bed was empty. Ramesh hadn't come back yet. He was the studious type, always glued to his books, always the last one to leave the library. The others barely thought about it. That was just who he was. It was around midnight when the door finally creaked open. There he was, Ramesh, his shirt untucked, eyes heavy, a bag dangling loosely from his shoulder. He gave them a weak smile, muttered something about being dead tired, and walked straight to his bed. He dropped his bag near the desk, kicked off his shoes, and pulled the blanket over himself without another word. No one questioned him. Everyone was too tired. They just assumed he had finally crashed after another late-night study marathon. But when morning came, something was wrong. His bed was untouched, perfectly made. The blanket was folded neatly, the pillow smooth, the sheets unwrinkled, as if no one had slept there at all. At first, his roommates laughed it off. Maybe he had woken up early. Maybe he was already in the bathroom. But his shoes were still by the door. His ID card was still on the desk. His bag, the same one they saw him drop last night, was still leaning against the wall. And Ramesh was nowhere. 3 boys checked the washroom. The mess hall even peeked into lecture halls that morning. Nothing. No one had seen him. By evening, panic had set in. They replayed the moment in their heads over and over. They were sure they had seen him come in. They remembered the sound of his bed creaking. They remembered him muttering about being exhausted. It wasn't just one of them. All 3 had seen it. But where had he gone? The warden was called. He didn't look surprised, but his silence made them uneasy. Finally, he ordered the security guard to bring up the CCTV footage from the corridor outside room 26. There he was, Ramesh, entering the hallway at exactly 12:04 a.m., walking toward the room, bag slung on his shoulder, exactly as his roommates described. The camera caught him opening the door, and then nothing. He never came back out. Not at 1 a.m., not at 3 a.m., not even at dawn. The door stayed shut until morning when his roommates left for class. The warden's face darkened. He hesitated before speaking, lowering his voice like he was afraid the walls might be listening. You boys don't know, but years ago, another student stayed in that very bed. He collapsed during exams. They said it was stress, overwork, but some claimed it was more than that. Since then, students whispered about strange things. Some saw shadows sitting on the bed. Others said they heard breathing when no one was there. A few swore they saw someone under the blanket, only to find the bed empty in the morning. The boys stared at him in disbelief, but deep inside, they remembered the details. How neatly the bed was made, how unnaturally smooth the sheets were. That night, none of them slept. The bed stood untouched, its neatness mocking them. Every sound in the hostel made them jump. The drip of water in the wash basin sounded like footsteps. The rustle of trees outside scraped against their nerves. Around 2 a.m., one of them whispered, "Do you hear that?" The others froze. A soft, steady breathing was coming from the bed. Long inhales, slow exhales, the unmistakable sound of someone asleep right next to them. One boy swore he saw the blanket shift, as if an invisible weight had settled beneath it. The outline of a figure seemed to rise faintly against the sheets, but when he blinked, it was gone. The bed was perfectly flat again. They didn't dare move. They didn't dare speak. They just lay there, listening, until exhaustion finally pulled them into uneasy sleep. In the morning, the bed was the same, perfect, untouched, and Ramesh was never seen again. But the boys of room 26 knew the truth. They knew what they had seen, what they had heard, and now, whenever new students moved in, they would warn them, never sleep in the empty bed. Every hostel has its own stories, the kind whispered in hushed tones late at night, after lights out, when fear feels heavier in the dark. At this hostel, it was the bathroom on the second floor. By day, it seemed ordinary enough. Long mirrors stained with toothpaste, floors wet from leaking taps, cubicles with broken locks, and the faint stink of disinfectant, never strong enough to cover the damp, moldy smell. But at night, it became something else. The boys swore that if you went there alone, past midnight, you would hear whispers, never clear, never loud enough to understand, but always there, soft, crawling through the air, wrapping around your ears like someone leaning too close. Most laughed it off. They teased each other with dares, but few were brave enough to step into that bathroom when the hostel had gone quiet, except one boy. Rohit isn't the kind to believe in ghost stories. He had always been practical, logical, the one who explained away strange noises as wind, shadows as tricks of the light. When he first heard the whispers, he assumed it was the pipes. Old hostels always made strange sounds, but the more he listened, the less it sounded like pipes. It happened one night after a late study session. The corridors were silent, lights buzzing faintly above. When he walked into the bathroom, his slippers splashed against the damp tiles, and as soon as the door swung shut behind him, he heard it, soft, faint, almost like two people talking far away. He checked the cubicles one by one, but they were empty. The last one was locked. He crouched and looked underneath. Nothing, just darkness, when he told the others the next morning. Some laughed, but a few grew quiet. One senior leaned closer and said, "Don't ever stand near the last cubicle at night." That's where it started. When Rohit pressed him, the senior told the story. Years ago, a boy had been locked in there as a prank during ragging. By the time someone found him in the morning, he was slumped against the door, lips cracked, voice gone. Some said he screamed until his throat gave out. Others claimed he had whispered the whole night, whispering so softly that no one could hear. The seniors joked that his whispers never stopped. They were still there, echoing through the tiles, waiting for someone to answer. Rohit pretended to laugh along, but the story stayed with him. He began noticing things he hadn't before. How cold the bathroom felt compared to the rest of the hostel. How the mirrors seemed to fog up even when the air wasn't humid. How the last cubicle's door sometimes rattled faintly on its own. He wanted proof. One Saturday night, when most of the hostel was asleep, Rohit walked to the bathroom with his phone. It was almost 2 a.m. The corridor was empty, silent except for the hum of the lights. Inside, the air felt heavy, damp. The dripping of a tap echoed sharply against the walls. He set his phone on the basin, camera facing the row of cubicles, and pressed record. Then he sat down on the bench near the wall and waited. At first, nothing. Just the faint drip, drip. 5 minutes passed. 10, then it came. The whispers, low, soft, hurling through the silence. At first, they sounded like rustling paper, then like words, though he couldn't understand them. They rose and fell, almost rhythmic, like chanting. Rawat's chest tightened. He forced himself to stay still, to let the recording capture everything. The whispers grew sharper, more insistent. They weren't coming from the walls anymore. They were coming from the last cubicle, the locked one. The door shuddered. Just once, like someone inside had pressed against it. Rawat's heart pounded in his ears. but he didn't move. He stared at the door, his body frozen. Then came the sound of breathing, slow, deep, from just beyond that locked door. The whispers rose again, faster now, overlapping, like more than one voice, some high, some low, weaving together in a language he couldn't understand. His hands trembled. He wanted to grab his phone and run, but fear pinned him down. Something shifted under the door, a shadow, pale, thin, as if someone was crouching there, watching him. That broke him. He snatched the phone, bolted out of the bathroom, and didn't stop running until he was back in his room, slamming the door shut behind him. He couldn't sleep that night. He just lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the whispers still echoing in his ears. The next morning, he forced himself to play the recording. At first, it was just what he remembered, the dripping water, the faint whispers. Then they grew louder, clearer, not just chanting anymore, the words, his own name, over and over. Rohit. His blood ran cold, and then he saw it in the reflection of the camera under the cubicle door. A face, white, stretched, grinning too wide, watching him. The video ended when he grabbed the phone, but that image was burned into his memory. He never went back to that bathroom again. Not during the day, code, not even with friends, but the whispers followed him. Sometimes he heard them in the corridors when he was alone, sometimes in the library between shelves, sometimes in his own room, just as he was drifting off to sleep, always faint, always patient, always calling his name. And he knew, deep down, that the bathroom hadn't finished with him. Not yet. Every hostel has its share of secrets. Ghost stories whispered late at night, rumors passed down from batch to batch, and tales meant to scare the new boys. But in this hostel, there was one story that wasn't just a rumor. It was a warning about a room no one wanted to talk about for long. They called it the ragging room. Years ago, long before most of the students currently there had even joined, a boy named Dev had been locked inside that room as punishment. Seniors were notorious for their cruel, ragging rituals, but this one went too far. They left him there overnight, laughing as he banged at the door, begging to be released. By morning, when the door was opened, Dev was dead. His body was sprawled in the corner, eyes wide open, his face frozen in a scream that no one could forget. Since then, the hostel administration never used the room again. Officially, it was marked as storage, but the boys knew better. They whispered about strange sounds, knocks on the door at night, whispers echoing through the corridor when no one was there, and shadows moving across the room's single cracked window. The seniors, of course, turned this fear into a test of courage. Every batch of newcomers was dared to spend one night inside the ragging room. It was supposed to be a joke, a prank, just another way to terrify the freshers. That year, the dare fell upon Arjun, a new student who had just joined the hostel. He was quiet, serious, and not easily intimidated. While most of the other juniors avoided eye contact whenever the topic of the ragging room came up, Arjun smirked. He didn't believe in ghosts. He didn't believe in curses. For him, it was just another dark room. The seniors were delighted, a willing victim. At night, around midnight, they led him to the room. The corridor was unusually silent, as if the entire building was holding its breath. The door to the ragging room was old and wooden, its paint peeling, the lock rusted. The seniors pushed it open with a loud creak that echoed down the hall inside. The air was stale, suffocating, as though the room hadn't been touched in years. Dust floated in the dim light, spilling from the corridor. The walls were stained, and there was only one piece of furniture, a broken chair in the corner, facing the door. "Enjoy your night, hero," one of the seniors chuckled, locking the door behind Arjun. Their laughter faded as they walked away, leaving him in silence. At first, Arjun wasn't scared. He sat on the floor, leaning against the wall, scrolling through his phone to pass the time. The glow of the screen was comforting, a reminder that outside this suffocating room, the world still existed. But soon, the battery began to drain. By 1 in the morning, his phone died, leaving him in complete darkness. That was when the room changed. The air grew heavier, colder. Arjun felt as though he was being watched, though he knew he was alone. The silence pressed down on him, louder than any noise. He tried to shrug it off, telling himself it was just his imagination. But then came the whisper. It was faint at first, a low sound, almost like the rustling of fabric. He froze, straining his ears. The whisper grew clearer. A voice that was saying his name, Arjun. He bolted upright, his heart pounding. The voice was coming from the far corner, the same corner where the broken chair stood. He could barely make out its outline in the dark, but he was sure the chair was empty. The whisper came again, louder this time. Arjun. His throat went dry. He wanted to call out, to tell whoever was playing a trick on him to stop, but his voice caught. He backed against the wall, his nails digging into the plaster dot. Then, slowly, the chair moved. Just a small scrape, as though someone had shifted their weight on it. Arjun's stomach turned. He wasn't imagining it. Something was there. The whispers multiplied. Dozens of voices now, low and overlapping, speaking in tones he couldn't understand. They seemed to be all around him, circling him, closing in. He pressed his hands over his ears, but the voices only grew louder, echoing inside his skull. He couldn't take it anymore. He screamed, banging on the door, begging to be let out. Open the door. Please, let me out. The seniors, who had been loitering down the hall, exchanged nervous glances. They had expected fear, maybe some shouting, but not this, not the raw, desperate terror in his voice. They hurried back and unlocked the door when they swung it open. Arjun was curled in the corner, exactly where Dev had been found years ago. His eyes were wide, unblinking, his face pale as death. His lips trembled as he whispered, "He was here. He wouldn't stop calling me." The seniors pulled him out, shaking themselves. Arjun refused to step back inside that room ever again. In fact, he never spent another night in the hostel. His parents came to take him home within the week. The ragging room remained locked after that. The seniors never dared anyone again, and the whispers, they never stopped. Some nights, boys walking past that corridor swore they could still hear it. A faint voice calling a name that didn't belong to them. Hostels are alive at night in ways that people outside never understand. In the daytime, there's laughter, footsteps, shouting, even the occasional music slipping through the cracks of old doors. But at night, when the lights go out and everyone retreats to their rooms, the silence takes over. That silence doesn't feel natural. It feels heavy, like the walls themselves are listening in one particular hostel. The silence was worse in room 312. On paper, room 312 was no different than the rest. A cramped square of concrete, 2 iron beds, 2 desks pushed against peeling walls, a single window, and a ceiling fan bolted to the cracked plaster above. But anyone who had stayed there before would warn the same thing. It's not the room that's cursed. It's the fan. Generations of students had passed down the story. They claimed the fan moved on its own, even when the electricity was gone, even when the switch was turned firmly off. The blades would turn slowly, like something invisible kept it moving. Of course, every year brought in new students who didn't believe. And that year, the skeptic was Karan. Karan wasn't the type to scare easily. He was sharp, logical, the kind of boy who dismissed ghost stories as the product of overactive imaginations and sleepless nights. So when seniors jokingly mentioned that room 312 was the haunted one, Karan just laughed. Haunted by a ceiling fan, he scoffed. That's the weakest ghost story I've ever heard. The others didn't laugh back. That night, Karan moved in. He arranged his books on the desk, placed his clothes neatly in the cupboard, and lay down on the hard hostel mattress. Everything seemed normal until midnight. The power went out, plunging the building into darkness. The air in room 312 grew thick, pressing down on him. Karan lay still, listening to the quiet, and then he heard it. Kriak. His eyes flicked up. The fan was turning, slowly, lazily. The blades cut through the heavy air. Karan sat up, frowning. He reached for the switch off. He looked at the bulb in the corner. Dead. The entire building had no power. There was no wind from the window, no current flowing through the wires. Yet the fan kept spinning. Old hostile junk, he muttered, trying to laugh at himself. It probably just keeps its momentum. But the creaking didn't stop. The fan spun until dawn, its sound filling the room, groaning like old wood under strain. By morning, when the electricity returned, the fan slowed to a stop. Karan didn't tell anyone. He convinced himself it was nothing. But the second night, the same thing happened. The fan came alive the moment the lights went out, and this time, Karan saw something else as the blades turned. The faint glow of moonlight spilled through the window, casting moving shadows on the walls. The shadows bent strangely, not matching the fan's movement. He watched, frozen, as the shadows twisted into something long, hanging down a figure. At first, he thought his tired eyes were tricking him, but the shape became clearer. A body, swaying slowly, rope around his neck, head bent unnaturally to one side. Karen's blood ran cold. He forced his eyes shut, muttering to himself, "It's not real. It's not real. Just sleep." But even with his eyes closed, he heard it, the creak of rope, in rhythm with the turning fan. When he finally opened his eyes, the figure was gone. The fan had stopped. The room was silent. The next morning, he went to the seniors, half laughing, half trembling, and asked them about the ghost story. For the first time, they told him the truth. Years ago, a boy had lived in room 312. A quiet boy, lonely, always keeping to himself. No one remembered his name clearly, only that one night. He was found hanging from the ceiling fan since then. The fan was never the same. Some boys claimed the fan turned because the boy's soul still hung from it. Others swore they had seen his body themselves, a pale shadow swaying from the blades, creaking with every slow turn. Karan tried to laugh it off, but his hands trembled. He told himself it was only stories, just stories. But on the third night, everything changed. The power cut again. The fan spun. The creak filled the air, but this time it didn't stop its spinning. The rope appeared again, clearer, more solid than before. The body dangled just above him, toes almost brushing his face as he lay frozen on the bed. He forced himself to look away, to hide under his blanket. But when he peeked out again, his head had turned, slowly, until his face was looking directly at him. The boy's eyes were open, milky, empty, staring. Karen screamed, bolting out of the room. The corridor echoed with his voice until seniors rushed out, grabbing him, asking what had happened. He refused to go back inside. By morning, his things were packed. He begged the warden to move him. His request was granted without hesitation. Room 312 remained locked for weeks after, but eventually another boy was assigned there, and soon after, the whispers began again. Students walking past the door at night swore they heard the creak of the fan. Some claimed they saw shadows swaying through the cracked window, and a few swore that if you stood under the fan long enough, the shadow would turn towards you. Its eyes would find yours, and once they did, it wouldn't matter where you moved, because no matter what room you stayed in, the fan would always find a way to keep spinning. Every hostel has its own forbidden place, a corner no one touches, a story no one questions. In this hostel, that place was a storage room on the ground floor. A small, dusty chamber filled with broken chairs, discarded mattresses, and one particular object that drew everyone's attention: an old, heavy wooden trunk. It sat in the center of the room, dark and weathered with age, its surface scarred by scratches no one could explain. Rust had eaten through the lock, but strangely, no one had ever opened it. The seniors warned the juniors to stay away, whispering that the trunk belonged to a boy who had once lived in the hostel decades ago, a boy who had died under mysterious circumstances. Of course, most laughed it off. "It's just junk," they'd say, but no one dared to touch it. Not really, until one night it started as a dare, like most bad decisions in hostels do. A group of boys, 4 of them, gathered outside the storage room, flashlights in hand. They had been trading ghost stories all evening, hyping each other up, until finally, one of them said the words they all secretly wanted to hear. "Let's open the trunk." The door to the storage room groaned as they pushed it open. Dust filled the air, making them cough as their beams of light swept across broken furniture and cobwebbed walls. And then, in the middle, there it was, the trunk. It looked older up close. Its wood nearly black, the carvings along its edges strange and uneven, almost like claw marks. The lock, though rusted, still clung stubbornly in place. The boys hesitated, their laughter fading into uneasy silence. But curiosity won. With a rock and some force, they smashed the lock open. The sound echoed through the empty corridor. For a moment, nothing happened, just silence. Then, slowly, they lifted the lid. Inside, the air was musty, heavy, as if it had been sealed away for centuries. They coughed, waving their hands, before shining their lights in. There were clothes, old, torn, stained with something dark that might have been rust or something else. A few books, their pages yellowed and brittle, and, at the very bottom, a small, leather-bound diary. One boy picked it up, flipping through the pages. Most were filled with messy handwriting, ramblings about loneliness, strange noises at night, and drawings of shadowy figures. But the last page made his skin crawl, written in shaky letters, as though carved into the paper with desperation, were the words, "It follows me. It hides in the corners. If you open this trunk, it will be free again." The boys went silent. Their laughter was gone now, replaced by an unease that weighed heavier with every passing second. One of them chuckled nervously. "It's just some crazy guy's scribbles. Don't tell me you're scared." But that night, the real horror began. Back in their rooms, each of the 4 boys struggled to sleep. The air felt strange, colder somehow. One swore he heard scratching beneath his bed. Another woke up gasping, convinced someone had been standing over him by morning. Their eyes were bloodshot, their faces pale. They laughed it off to the others, but the fear lingered. The second night got worse. All 4 reported the same thing, the same dream. They were trapped in the storage room, the trunk in front of them, its lid slowly rising on its own. Inside, instead of clothes or books, there were eyes, dozens of pale, glowing eyes staring back at them. When they woke, each of them had long scratches down their arms. By the 3rd night, one of the boys was gone. His bed was empty. His sheets were neatly folded, as though he had never been there. His shoes were still by the door, his bag still under the bed. But he himself had vanished. The remaining 3 panicked. They begged the warden for help, but when they tried to explain what they had done, what they had seen, the warden's face turned grim. "You opened it?" he whispered. His voice cracked, and for the first time, the boys saw fear in the old man's eyes. He told them the truth. The trunk hadn't been kept there by accident. Decades ago, a boy had gone mad inside the hostel. He claimed he was being followed by something no one else could see. He filled his diary with drawings of shadows, of figures with eyes too many to count. One day, he was found dead in his room, but the body was never buried. Instead, the warden back then sealed everything he owned inside that trunk and locked it away. It was never meant to be opened again. Now, whatever he feared was free. That night, the 3 remaining boys refused to sleep. They sat together in one room, the lights on, clinging to the hope that being together would keep them safe. But at 3 a.m., the lights flickered and died. In the darkness, the scratching returned, not under one bed, but under all of them. A low, dragging sound, as though nails were carving into wood. The boys huddled together, trembling, when suddenly one of them screamed. The others turned their flashlights on him. His mouth was open, his eyes wide, staring at the corner of the room. They followed his gaze and saw it, a shape, crouched low, its limbs too long, its eyes glowing faintly in the beam of the flashlight. Watching them, the light flickered again, and when it returned, the shape was gone by morning. Only 2 boys were left. The warden locked the storage room permanently after that. He chained the trunk shut, sealed it with heavy locks, and warned the hostel never to speak of it again. But late at night, students still whisper. They say if you walk past the storage room, you can hear faint scratching coming from inside. Others claim the trunk has moved slightly, as though something inside is shifting. It's waiting, and every few years, a boy vanishes. His bed neatly made, his belongings untouched. Just gone. No one knows for certain what was inside that trunk. But those who do know one thing never deny it. It should never have been opened.